Hey, welcome back to another Wildcard MTG video. I am back again with another deck tech, this time for Arabella, a new commander spoiled from Duskmourn. So, funny story, as I was working on a different deck tech, I saw this card spoiled and I knew I had to build around it. This card is such an interesting Boros design, but it can still play into a lot of what Boros is known for. So that being like swinging and equipments, but also with the weird life gain and having a bunch of creatures. So lots of cool stuff with this commander. And another thing I want to preface with this deck list is that I actually opted to use a lot of new cards that were actually spoiled from Duskmourn, so this deck can't be fully built until the set is released. So it's mostly theory crafted, but it really has solid legs with these new cards that offer synergies into the commander itself. Another thing that we're playing into with this deck is the life gain sub-theme with a bunch of our creatures in the deck. So, with that in mind, let's look at the commander. We have Arabella, Abandoned Doll, 1 red, 1 white, legendary artifact creature, toy. When Arabella, Abandoned Doll attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. And that counts the commander itself. Now, we are going to have ways to probably pump the commander a little bit, so we're going to really be relying on a bunch of other creatures in our deck and or making some tokens, but not a lot of tokens. So with that, now that we know what the commander does, let's look at some of the deck stats of this deck. First up, let's look at the mana spread. So within this deck, we have 54% white mana, which is 69% of all symbols, and our white mana production is 54%. And we have 31% red mana, and our mana production of the red is 57%. And colorless is about 28%, which really doesn't matter too much. But we do have an even spread of red and white mana production with about 50-50, a little over 50 for each one. So first off, let's get into some of our 1-drops. So for the 1-drops in this deck, we have 9 creatures, 3 instants, and 6 artifacts. And we have a 97.41% chance of playing these on curve. So that should give you a little idea of where this deck's going. Now for 2-drops, we have 14 creatures, 2 sorceries, 2 instants, 12 artifacts, and 1 enchantment, and we have an 89.46% chance of playing these on curve. This is the bulk of our deck, the 2-drop slot. Or I should say the 1 and 2-drop slot. We are so low to the ground with this deck that realistically we probably could be safe and cut a couple lands. I'm not going to do that with this deck. Our land base is going to stay pretty high. But this is where the bulk of the deck is. So looking at our 3-drops, we have 5 creatures, 3 instants, 1 artifact, and 1 enchantment. And we have 73.7% chance of playing these on curve. Now our enchantment is an X spell, so this mana value may not be applicable to this percentage. In our 4-drops, we literally only have 2. We have 1 creature and 1 sorcery, and we have a 59.22% chance of playing these on curve. So as you can see, from here on out, we do not have much higher mana value stuff. It's pretty low to the ground after this. Our 5-drop is just 1 creature, and we have a 42.51% chance of playing it on curve. And our 6-drop, we only have 2 sorceries, and we have a 28.21% chance of playing those on curve. And then finally, we have 1 enchantment that is technically in the 6-drop slot, but realistically, we should be looking at this in the 2-drop slot. It says we have a 10% chance of playing it on card, but realistically, we are not going to be playing the higher mana value of this card, and we'll get to that later. So as you can see, the mana value of the deck is super low to the ground, and we're going to look to punish our opponents through our commander's attack trigger. So with that, let's look at some of the creatures in the deck and their synergies within. We're going to be running 30 creatures in the deck, so a high amount of creatures, and they're all 1/1s and 2/2s. They are Acrobatic Cheerleader, Agate Instigator, Alseid of Life's Bounty, Ariok Champion, Brash Taunter, Clockwork Percussionist, Daxos, Blessed by the Sun, Enduring Innocence, Flamewright, Fear of Missing Out, Giggling Skitterspike, Handweir Militia Captain, Hardened Escort, Irreverent Gremlin, Lunarch Veteran, Molten Gatekeeper, Mother of Runes, Norin Swift Survivalist, Ragged Playmate, Selfless Savior, Skrelv Defector Mite, Sneaking Guide, Spirited Companion, Split Skin Doll, SRAM Senior Edificer, Stonecoil Serpent, Suture Priest, the Jolly Balloon Man, Tillalani's Summoner, and Toby Beastie Befriender. So first thing, let's go over some of the new Duskmourn cards that synergize with the commander, and the first one up is the Jolly Balloon Man. So this card has haste, its power is 1, and it allows us to copy another creature as a 1/1 to attack, and that synergizes with Arabella right there. We're getting an extra 1/1 on the field, and it could be an enter the battlefield effect or another creature that pings for, gaining life, or pings for damage to opponent. If we get another creature, we can pick and choose. So Jolly Balloon Man is really cool in this deck because we can just make copies of creatures that we want to have on the battlefield. Now it's only 1, and yes, it will be sacrificed at the end step, but that is totally fine. We can deal with that. It's not really what we're going for. We don't, just having that extra creature on the battlefield is enough with this card, and it's cool that it synergizes with what Arabella wants to do. Next up is Enduring Innocence. It says Enduring Innocence, 1 white enchantment creature, Sheep Glimmer. It has lifelink, and whenever one or more other creatures you control with power 2 or less enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. When Enduring Innocence dies, if it was a creature, return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's an enchantment. So really interesting synergy there. So it helps us draw cards because we're going to be playing a lot of creatures with power 1 or 2. Yes, we only get to draw 1 card a turn, but that's fine. It's still card draw. And then when it dies, it just comes back as an enchantment, so we can still draw cards. And then people have to deal with getting rid of it a second time around. Much harder. You can use creature removal on this thing for sure, but enchantment removal is a lot harder to come by. So it gives you a little bit extra time with the card if somebody doesn't board wipe or something like that. Now, Ragged Playmate and Sneaking Guide allow us to get in for unblockable commander damage, as well as maybe any other creature we may need to just hit an opponent. So it's good for making creatures unblockable. Both of those you just pay 2 or 1 and get in for damage. Giggling Skitterspike is an indestructible damage dealer that can get bigger if we need it to with the monstrosity cost, and every time it attacks or blocks, we're going to be dealing that much damage to an opponent. It's one of the cooler new cards, and it really fits in with this deck because at its base it's a 1/1, then it becomes a 6/6, and we're still going to be doing a bunch of damage with that card, especially with it being indestructible. It's a little bit harder to get rid of. And one last creature I want to touch on here is Fear of Missing Out. It's a 2-mana enchantment creature nightmare that is a 2/3, and it says when it enters, discard a card, then draw a card. And it has Delirium, and whenever Fear of Missing Out attacks for the first time each turn, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, untap target creature. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, so this is a way to attack one other time with our commander if we need to. I didn't put a ton of extra combat phases cards in this deck because it's not really how I wanted to go with it. I just want to have a bunch of 1/1s and 2/2s, but this is at least one good way to do that. Now, we're also running a life gain and drain sub-theme with some of the other creatures in this deck. We have creatures like Suture Priest, Molten Gatekeeper, Lunarch Veteran, and Agate Instigator are all part of that package. They ping when, creatures come in, and you gain life when creatures come in. Since we're going to be putting a lot of creatures onto the battlefield most likely, both of these creatures synergize well in the package. Now, the rest of the creature package is mostly commander protection. The big part of this deck is really keeping our commander on the board at all costs. So we have cards like Alcedes, the Life's Bounty, Mother of Runes, and cards like that give our commander, or whatever creature we may choose, protection from a color. So we can protect it from any sort of removal, bounce spell, anything short of a board wipe, as long as it is targeting our commander. So let's move on to the sorceries. We are only running 5 in this deck. Dusk and Dawn, Eiganjo Uprising, Midnight Mayhem, Open the Vaults, and Rip Apart. So 2 of these sorceries make 1/1 and 2/2 tokens, which works really well with our commander. Those are Eiganjo Uprising and Midnight Mayhem, which is a new card from Duskmourn. It says, create 3 1/1 red gremlin creature tokens. Gremlins you control gain menace, lifelink, and haste until end of turn. So pretty good. We're going to be making 3 1/1s. We can attack with them and our commander. That's going to gain us a lot of life just from that, having 3 extra bodies. Pretty cool new card. Synergizes really, really well. Obviously, Eiganjo Uprising, creating X 2/2 white samurai creature tokens with vigilance. They gain menace and haste until end of turn. Yes, each opponent is going to create X -1 2/2 white samurai creature tokens with vigilance, but they don't have menace, and they're going to be probably using multiples of those to block your 2/2 samurais, and it doesn't matter. We're going to have all those extra bodies when our commander attacks, and we're going to get in with a bunch of damage just from that alone. So this card's really cool in this deck as well. Rip Apart is just a good removal spell, 3 damage or destroy target artifact or enchantments. And then Open the Vaults, if we need to get all of our artifact and enchantment cards back from the graveyard to the battlefield, this will do it, especially since we're an equipment deck. If they get removed or destroyed, we want to have ways to get them back. Our 1 board wipe in this deck is mainly used to save all of our creatures, since they're most likely going to be 3 power or under. So for that, we're running Dusk and Dawn. And then if we do happen to board wipe or somebody else board wipes, we should be able to get back almost all of our creatures thanks to the second side of that card. Now let's look at our instance. We are running Generous Gift, Lightning Helix, Path to Exile, Stroke of Midnight, Swords to Plowshares, Untimely Malfunction, Unwanted Remake, and Wear and Tear. Now, a lot of our instances are just basically targeted removal like Generous Gift and Stroke of Midnight. Not really much to go through here. You should know most of these cards if you've been playing Magic for a long time. Yes, they're pretty generic staples, and I typically hate using staples in decks, but for this deck, it's fine. You kind of need them for it, so don't have to go too in depth with those. Now, our artifacts. We're running 19 artifacts. We have Arcane Signet, Basilisk Collar, Brotherhood Regalia, Glimmer Lens, Horn of Valhalla and Ysgard's Call, Infiltration Lens, Inquisitorial Rosette, Lava Spur Boots, Leather Armor, Lightning Greaves, Prowler's Helm, Psychic Paper, Robe of Stars, Skull Clamp, Soul Ring, Swiftfoot Boots, Talisman of Conviction, Trailblazer's Boots, and Whisperer Silk Cloak. Now, our artifacts are mostly equipment, which, yeah, that's what Boros does, but we're really running these equipments to protect our commander at all costs, like I said. It's either one of 3 things: protect our commander, draw us cards, or make the commander unblockable. So we have cards like Whisper Silk Cloak, Trailblazer's Boots, Brotherhood Regalia, and Psychic Paper to make the commander unblockable. We have Lava Spur Boots, Swiftfoot Boots, Robe of Stars, and Leather Armor to give various forms of protection to our commander, especially with Lava Spur Boots and the Leather Armor. Those are two separate instances of wards, so if somebody were to target our commander, they have to pay both instances of that ward, so 1 and 1, so 2 basically. And since Leather Armor is a free equip, why not? We have other equipment that helps with card draw, like Skull Clamp. I mean, come on. With all the 1/1s and 2/2s you're going to be making, you want Skull Clamp in this deck. You're going to be drawing a lot of cards. We have Infiltration Lens and Glimmer Lens, which also draw us quite a bit of cards. And then we have a couple equipments that make 1/1s and 2/2s with Horn of Valhalla and Inquisitorial Rosette. Now, our enchantments, we're only running 3. We're running Cavalcade of Calamity, Dollmaker's Shop / Porcelain Gallery, and the Roller Crusher Ride, 2 of which are new cards from Duskmourn. And that, again, kind of playing into the commander strategy, Dollmaker's Shops gives us a 1/1 toy token when we attack. Now, we are not going to need to unlock the other room unless it's for like a killing blow. That's really the only time I could see that we're going to need to unlock that room. Mostly, we just want to be making those 1/1 tokens. Now, the Roller Crusher Ride, this thing is cool. This is an awesome card for this deck and for a commander. We're most likely going to have Delirium at some point, so having this deal damage the way it does is awesome. And this card says it is X, 2 and a red. It's a legendary enchantment. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to a permanent or player while there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, it deals double that damage instead. Now, we'll get back to that in just a second. To continue on what the card says, it says when the Roller Crusher Ride enters, it deals X damage up to X target creatures. So it is sort of a board wipe in a sense that we can take out a couple creatures when it enters if we pay X into it. If not, we just have a 3-mana enchantment that doubles our commander's attack trigger damage, which is insane in this deck. Could you imagine if we have 5 creatures on the battlefield and we swing in for this? Our commander's now going to be pinging every player for 10 damage? I mean, that's such a good card, and it's a new card. I'm really stoked for this card in general. I think it's going to be good in a lot of decks as far as like non-combat damage goes. Spellslinger decks are going to love this, but the fact that it works with the trigger of the commander, that's crazy, because it's not combat damage. She's just dealing damage to each opponent. Now, our land package is pretty basic. I'm not going to go too deep into it. We have a Rogue's Passage to make the commander unblockable. A bunch of just common lands in decks. You will see it on the screen if you want an exact list of what I use. But, for Boros, we don't really need a ton of utility lands. So it's just basic lands. There's 34 lands in the deck. We went a little light because the mana curve is so low in this deck. So now let's get into some pros and cons. Some of the cons with the deck are, we have low power creatures, so if we're playing against a deck that's a lot of trample or an even more aggro deck than we are, it could really lead to a lot of our utility creatures dying. And remember, we don't even need to attack with our creatures, just our commander to get that trigger. So in fact, the more creatures we have out, the better. Which leads to another con of this deck. If you are playing in a board wipe heavy meta, this deck will fold immensely. I mean, you need at least 3 to 4 creatures out at all times to make this deck really shine and do what it needs to do. So if you're just getting board wiped over and over and over again, this deck is just going to do nothing. And finally, control and removal is our enemy. And this is with any deck, but this deck specifically, removal's pretty rough on us, especially if a lot of our utility creatures get removed. We need quite a bit of pieces on the board to have our commander be effective. So if we are against a control or removal based player, this deck can be significantly weakened in that respect. Now, some of the pros, this deck's pretty go wide, and we can get in for all kinds of damage if needed. Now, we also have a life gain kind of sub-theme in the deck, so that can help us stay ahead of more aggro decks with our high life total, because we're going to be gaining life off our attack trigger from our commander, and we have a suite of creatures that gain us life every time a creature comes into play on the battlefield. Now, another pro is in our commander itself. The fact that this commander hits all players is such a great ability. I mean, draining each player for 3, 4, 5 plus damage on attack trigger is huge. So that's why I say, like, you could build this deck in a way where you're getting multiple attack triggers, and that would be awesome as well. I didn't really go with that kind of a build. I just wanted to pump as many creatures into this deck as I could. So that, just think of that as another way to build this deck, just getting multiple attack triggers with the commander. That would really, it would send this thing over the top, I think. And finally, our last pro is our commander also being low mana value. She is 2 mana. I mean, 2 mana, that is so quick. We can get her out onto the board real fast, and if she gets removed, we can just recast her as often as possible. I mean, there's not really a point where it's going to be too hard to recast her. I mean, maybe if she gets up to like 8, 9, 10 mana or whatever, but I don't see that happening, especially if you're playing smart. And so that's the last pro of this deck. And finally, the win con. Well, there aren't any combos or anything like that in this deck, and really this is an aggro deck, so we're going to have to be attacking a lot. We're going to be wanting to get that trigger from our commander, hopefully with unblockable damage. If the commander can't be blocked, that would be great. But we have ways to kind of make the commander evasive and, you know, all kinds of stuff like that. So going wide and attacking as much as possible, and just having those as many 1/1s and 2/2s on the battlefield for our commander to trigger and just dish out so much damage to everybody and gain a bunch of life, and that is how the deck wins. It's Boros, but it's not. It's so interesting, this deck. I mean, when I saw it, I was just like, man, forget whatever deck tech I'm doing right now. I really want to look at this deck. This commander's so neat. I can't wait to build it myself. Like I said, you know, a lot of these cards are from Duskmourn, so you can't really build it, but I think this is going to be super fun. Yeah, it still plays into like the Boros equipment stuff, but the way that I put so much like protection and evasiveness with the equipments and not just like average Boros swords and whatever, I think that makes it a little more interesting in my opinion. But I want to know what you think. If you enjoy this deck tech and are super stoked to build this commander, let me know in the comments, and let me know if you want me to build a commander for you. I have a couple that I'm working on for my personal decks, in which I'm going to pull out my decks, show you all the cards and how I built them and how they work, and film them, so to speak. So that'll be something to look forward to. But in the meantime, again, thank you so much if you checked this out. This is, like I said, kind of a new thing for me. I didn't really expect that many people to check out these videos, but I guess I'm doing something different than a lot of people out there, and I really appreciate you checking them out. And anytime I could try to build a new commander and theory craft it, I will do that, but I will not do this for every set. This one just happened to catch my eye, and I thought it was really cool. So yeah, that is the deck. I'm Wildcard MTG. Thank you so much for checking this out, and we'll see you on the next one.